Hello, I'm Donal McCauley, and welcome to this BMJ Leader Conversation. Today I'm talking to David Pendleton, who's Professor of Leadership at Henley Business School. But he's also taken on an advisory role with the Faculty of Medical Leadership and Management. David, let's take you back, way back to the very beginning, because you started off with a degree in psychology in Nottingham.
Very interesting question. I'm never entirely sure why I do anything. I suppose we all have theories about it, but um, I'm the extremely educated only child of completely uneducated parents. They left school at 14. Neither of them had the money to go any further in school, and so the moment they could leave, they did. But they sort of had this belief in the power of education to transform lives. Where this came from, I've no idea because they'd not experienced it, and no one in their family had. I was the first kid to go to university. Um, I was living in Nottingham at the time, and I was bored with every single subject at school. So I thought, well, I'll do something different. And having been an only child, I spent an awful lot of my time sort of observing and being on the edge, on the outside of things. And I think that sort of predisposed me a bit to psychology, to sort of try and understand a subject that purported to help me understand what people are like and why they do things and what their motivations are about and how personality works. And those sorts of fundamental questions really rather attracted me. So psychology has always been my subject. I've always loved it. And although I'm professor in leadership now, I very much take a psychologist's view of leadership.
Well, then, after your undergraduate degree, you took a break before you did your DPhil.
I did. I was heading off in a particular direction, which turned out to be a bit of a dead end for me. I was going to do a PhD at Brunel, and worked with a wonderful guy called Laurie Thomas. And in some ways, the origins of the Pendleton rules are in part to do with Laurie Thomas. He had this view about good points first, David. Let's understand what people do well. And that was his view right from the start. But in those 5 years, I explored the subject of kids reading to learn. That was the subject I was interested in. And also more broadly, the idea of a sort of slightly tautologically sounding, I know, but learning to learn. How is it that we learn to learn? And that was Laurie's great specialty. And Laurie was a great guy, generous, smart, had been a production engineer, but quit production engineering the moment he realized that most of the issues he was dealing with were psychological issues. And he took a different turn in his career and became a professor in psychology. Um, so I took 5 years, and during that time, I did a little work with Laurie Thomas at Brunel at the Centre for the Study of Human Learning, and then also did a little bit of teaching and went up to Leeds, what is now Leeds Met and was then Leeds Poly, to do some teaching in psychology to graduates who are going to teach mentally handicapped kids. And having done that, I bumped into the group that was training health education officers, and suddenly my interest in health got awakened. And I just thought, this is for me. So I took a detour and went to Oxford, did my doctorate with Michael Argyle, the doyen of social skills training. I definitely took a deliberate view of this because Byrne and Long had just brought out their book on doctors talking to patients, and they've been looking using the lens of audio tapes. And I thought, well, let's see what we do if we can take the video camera into the surgery, and let's see if we can find ways of not just understanding what goes on between doctors and patients better, but also maybe helping it become more efficient, more effective.
Well, this is when you became a very important part of my life because I trained in general practice. So all your work on the consultation is very much part of what I grew up with. So let's talk about the consultation.
Sure, sure. I mean, the credit, as you know, is not mine. It's a team of us. It was Theo Schofield and Peter Havelock and Peter Tate and me, and the four of us got up to a lot of mischief together because we'd been told time and again, that you can't teach people to consult with patients. They've either got it or they haven't. And I think our view of that was that can't be right. That can't be right. It's a social skill. You've got to be able to, first of all, understand it and describe what good looks like. And then surely once we've done that, you can do something to help people do it more effectively. And that was the kind of pig-headed attitude that we came at it with.
Now, you mentioned something earlier, and that's Pendleton's rules.
Yeah.
Now, they were very current at that time, but they're still current.
Yes.
Take us a run through Pendleton's rules.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about them to start with, if I may. A couple of things. As I say, I mentioned Laurie Thomas in the context of this because I was thinking about talking to you today, just last night, and I remembered Laurie Thomas, this lovely, generous, warm, bright psychologist who was very influential in my life. And it was he who had this insistence on let's understand what's done well before we look at anything else. And so that was the kind of origin of it. But the second thing I would tell you. And of course, when I was talking to my three partners in crime, Messrs. Schofield, Havelock, and Tate, they were saying how an awful lot of medical education was education by humiliation, by getting people to feel sort of bad about the things they'd done wrong. And, I remember Peter Tate saying to me that one medical teacher had said to him, if he had an IQ one less, he'd be a plant, and all this sort of stuff. And we all kind of rebelled against this and thought, well, that can't be a good environment for learning in. So we thought a bit about the preconditions for learning. And so I said, well, look, I've been working with this guy, and we start here. We start with what did you do well? And so we sort of fleshed out those rules. But the other thing I'll say about it, just incidentally, before I go through them, is they almost didn't make it into the book because we thought they were so kind of surely this is just obvious, isn't it? Why on earth would anyone do anything else? I wrote that bit of the first edition of the consultation book, and then I rewrote it again for the second edition. But as I say, they almost didn't make it into the book because we thought they were so kind of obvious. But it's turned out that they've what the book's been most known for. I think people sort of remember the tasks that we wrote about, but they really remember the rules. And I had them cited to me not just in the context of medicine, but in the context of other professions as well. So a guy who was learning to be an accountant said they used the Pendleton rules in accountancy and all this sort of stuff. So it's been fascinating the way in which those fairly kind of simple principles have caught on. But the point of them is, and I had to write a corrective in the second edition of our consultation book, the new consultation, because people had, I think, believed that once they'd specified what had been done well and what had not, made some recommendations for how things could be improved, that was the feedback. No. For me, that was the menu. That wasn't the meal. That was just setting out the agenda. So what I had to write about was, look, our task is to be as analytic and careful and forensic about understanding what's done well as we are about what's not done well. We need to understand in great detail how a particular good thing happened so that you can repeat it and maybe even improve upon it. So that's the first thing I'd want to say here is, if anyone uses Pendleton rules, please don't think that once you've listed good things and listed bad things, that's it. It isn't. That's just the start of the conversation. But this notion of being as forensic and analytical about the strengths as you are about things that have not been done so well is the first corrective I had to write about. But the second was, what we're trying to do in many ways is make this a very kind of dispassionate, scientific teasing apart of what's going on in the consultation, not to be insensitive to the way people are feeling about these things, but rather to say, look, if we can stay in adult cerebral mode, then not only can we understand what's been going on, but we can correct it without the kind of complications of feeling bad or guilty or foolish or whatever. Let's just see it as a puzzle that we've got to solve. If we've specified through our tasks what we think a good consultation looks like, How close did you get? Let's look at the things you did well. Great, let's understand them. What words did you use? Where were you at the time? How did you think of that? What was the response? What were you feeling? Let's really understand that. And then let's look at the things that didn't go so well. And when we've done that over several consultations, what we're then building up is a picture of what Donald does well. These are the sorts of things that Donald does well. These are the sorts of things that tend to go a bit pear-shaped for Donald. If we can understand those pictures, then we can head off in a better place, into a better place, in a better direction.
Now, after this involvement with medicine, you had a wide international career in every sector. Now, I'm not going to ask you about that, but I'm going to ask you about a quotation, which was you said, I love it. I just love it. Tell me about that motivation.
Having finished my DPhil, I got involved because of John Hasler, who's another great influence in my life. John is and certainly was one of the best leaders I've known, and I've known lots. I've known people knighted for services to this, that, and the other, peers of the realm and all that. John, if I had to name the top 5 leaders I've ever encountered, John is on that list. He's terrific. Um, and John got me involved with the RCGP, with the RCGP exam, with Marshall Marinka and other people like this, people who were giants in their field. And but also got me involved in the Oxford Regional Vocational Training Scheme in general practice. That didn't lead to a job. It led to activity and paid for activity, but I had to sort of cobble together a living from doing small roles elsewhere. And then not only did I get married, but we had our first child, and I thought that I've got to do something a bit more than that to make a decent living. So I went to the King's Fund College, which was a management school for the health service, and taught what was called, I was a fellow in managerial psychology. And I got recruited out of there by a business psychology consultancy in Bristol. And that took me in a slightly different direction. It was a kind of a pivotal role, that role at the King's Fund. And I ended up working as effectively a management consultant, doing learning and development, management development, organization development, team development, executive development, all these various forms of trying to bring out the best in senior people in organizations. And what I was doing and the way I was doing it seemed to catch on. And so I got opportunities to go and live and work in Hong Kong for a couple of years, doing a project for Cathay Pacific Airways, meeting another great leader, a guy called Rod Eddington, who eventually came and ran British Airways, and got knighted for services to transportation. Got a chance to work on, I think, 4 of the 6 continents. I think there are 6 now. And not worked in South America. I think I've worked just about everywhere else, and work in just about every sphere of human endeavor, from charities, public sector, corporate sector, and so on. Worked in airlines and hospitality industry, retail, manufacturing, you name it, high tech, low tech, high touch, low touch. Because of course I'm completely agnostic as to the setting in which I do this, because my subject is people. And they're remarkably similar wherever you go. So, and what I love is the thought that we can make things better.
We've talked about leadership,
Yeah.
and you've met so many leaders,
Yeah.
but you wrote a book that said there are no more heroes. Leadership, no more heroes. Talk about
Okay.
that.
Well, let me tell you why. When I started to look at the subject of leadership, it was about the turn of the millennium, about the year 2000. I've been in that field for about 25 years. The first thing I noticed, and I came across a study, in fact, a chart that looks like a geological cross-section of a hillside with lots of strata. And what it is actually, it started out as a joke by a guy called Richard Pascal at Oxford. And it was a content analysis of the leadership research from 1950 to 2000. And what it shows is that basically the field is a mess. It's all over the place. Things come and go. And he called this business fads. He thought that leadership didn't feel like a scientific subject. It felt like a series of fads and fashions. And so I thought, well, surely we can do better than that. I mean, I'm a psychologist. The notion of evidence base and the work I've done in medicine told me that finding the evidence base for what you're doing is really rather important. And so I started then to put together some ideas which have culminated in a model called the primary colours model of leadership, which simply says there are three domains in which leaders have to work. There's the strategic domain, which is all about tomorrow. There's the operational domain, which is all about today. And there's the interpersonal domain, which is all about the people that you've got to take with you on the journey. And I arranged that as a Venn diagram. And funnily enough, I ended up with 7 zones in that, like 7 consultation tasks. I've got 7 leadership tasks. That wasn't where I set out. I didn't intend to do that, but that's kind of seemed to make good sense about what leaders have to do. But then I and my colleagues assessed leaders all over the world against these 7 criteria. And what we discovered is there wasn't one leader we ever looked at who was world-class in all aspects of leadership. So if you think you're going to be a leadership hero, stop now. In fact, I've often said that the fact that we didn't find one, I've personally assessed hundreds of leaders, and my colleagues and I have assessed thousands. And because we didn't find one who was world-class at all aspects of leadership, I've said that's either the world's worst sampling error, or there's something there that you have to take seriously. And so the first proposition I've got is that this Venn diagram is a map of the territory of leadership. It's not saying what you should do, it's saying what you have to do in leadership. But the second proposition of 4 is it's really hard to be good at all of it. So what I've been trying to say is if you want complete leadership, you won't get it from an individual. You'll get complete leadership from incomplete leaders working in teams of complementary differences. Hence, no more heroes.
Well, when you talk about complete leadership, let's move on to talk about work-life matters.
So when people talk about work-life balance, they talk about this kind of balance between work and it can't be life. I mean, work's a part of life, so you can't balance a bit with the whole, you know. But anyway, get rid of the logical nonsense and you end up with a kind of work-home balance, work and non-work balance. But the thing I find about that is that it's not a very helpful analysis. The thing I'm much more interested in is the balance in your work life. That is, when people are at work, what's the balance between those things that take energy and those things that give you energy? And if you get people to do an audit of that, they can do it quite simply. I just say, write down every element of your job, and they'll say, what's an element? And I say, anything you like. You know, so traveling, writing reports, seeing patients, whatever it might be. Each of these is an element of my work. And then simply decide, on balance, is that giving you or energy or taking it away? And if so, give a score out of 10. How much does it give or take away? And you can do a kind of rough and ready, slightly spurious calculation. Kind of, am I living in a world of positivity or negativity on balance? And then you can start to tweak things and make changes and make your life at work, you know, better for you and more complete and so on. And that's led to a field called job crafting. So instead of fitting people to jobs, you can actually fit jobs to people and maybe get a better work contribution from people who are happier doing what they're doing. But the idea of balance at work came from a motivation that I had, which was that, you know, I was just reflecting on my own life, I think, and what we have to understand is that we give the best hours of each day and the best years of our lives to our employers. So no wonder we're given what's called compensation. What are we compensating for? We're giving these chunks of our life away, you know. So my sense is work matters. The second chapter in Work Life Matters is work matters. Let's understand how and why it matters. You know, Freud reckoned people had 2 fundamental motives. One was to work and the other was to love. If it's that important, we better make the most of it we can. And so my motivation has always been to try to create work environments where people thrive. My wife and I, Jenny King and I, created the Edgecombe Consulting Group, and our theme was we want to do work that helps people and organizations to thrive, not just survive, not just get by, but to thrive. And we also wanted to create Edgecombe as an environment in which people could work, in which we could send them away at the end of the day with a smile on their face, not careworn, not knackered. You know, I wanted people to feel that work can be a joy. And you know, I fully understand that much of work doesn't feel like that. But on balance, can we not make it like that? And if we're thinking about leadership, isn't one of our responsibilities as leaders to create the conditions for people to do well, for people to succeed? And one of them must be that. It must be the conditions in which their morale and motivation stays high.
Now, you've brought all these themes of leadership and you've had all this experience around the world, and now you find yourself back at the beginning again because you're advising healthcare. Give us a couple of key messages that you would bring to the Faculty of Medical Leadership and Management based on your experience.
The first one, in a sense, is obvious, but it's really important to stress it. Leadership does make a difference. It's not so powerful, the evidence suggests, that on its own it can transform organizations. But for many people, that's exactly what it does. People work for people. People join an organization, but if they leave usually a boss that it just doesn't work with it. Leadership, whenever I ask people, whenever I run a session on leadership, I always start with, if I say leadership, what are the words that come to your mind? And when I start to write them all down, they're nearly always to do with the interpersonal aspects of leadership. Occasionally you get words like strategy or plan or whatever it might be, but often it's to do with things like inspiration, aspiration, motivation. These sorts of words come to people's minds. So leadership does make a difference. And in the current state of the health service, there are puzzles to solve in leadership and there are problems to solve. The difference is a puzzle is technical and can be solved. So how do we make the health service more efficient? That's a puzzle. How do we look after the morale and motivation of people who are absolutely on the chin strap and knackered because they're working far too many hours with far too many demands and it's too thankless? That's a problem. That's a problem because people's feelings and values are involved. So there are puzzles and problems. And leadership can make a difference to both. However complex the puzzles are, that's not where the agony is. It's in the area of the problems. So I want people to understand that leadership can make a difference to both. But the second thing is, I've just put a piece on accountability with Sir David Haslam in BMJ Leader. And what I'm saying there is, one of the problems with the health service at the moment, in my opinion, is that it is way too bureaucratic. You know, I want to know what's the question to which a committee is the answer, because it's probably the wrong question. You know, what we need is people to take responsibility. So the question I asked is 7.5 million, you know, people waiting for diagnosis and treatment. Whose job is it to sort that out? If you say everybody, that means nobody. If you say the Prime Minister, that also means nobody, because he can't do a damn thing about it. If you say the Secretary of State for Health, that also means nobody, because he can't do anything about it either. You know, inside the health service, how are we going to break up that into smaller and more manageable pieces? And whose job are we going to give it to make a difference to that? You see, the problem with committees is it obfuscates responsibility. So no one feels that it's really their issue. If they fail, that doesn't really matter because there are 15 other people on this committee, you know, it can't be me. And the other thing is that when you've got a bureaucracy, you've created a situation in which many people can say no to a suggestion, but no one can say yes and make it happen. Make it happen. In any other walk of life, that wouldn't be the case. Who's got 7.5 million people on their job description? If nobody, it's not going to happen. I'll tell you that now, because what we monitor and measure tends to get done, and if we don't, it doesn't tend to get done. What about the components of the health sector? What would that be? What would it be if we were to break it down into, let's say, the integrated care systems, the integrated care boards? What if we said to the chief execs of the integrated care boards, your job, this is your number, this is where you are now, and if you feel that you haven't got the opportunity to make a difference, what obstacles do we need to get out of your way that might be the Secretary of State's job. But if they can get the job, if they can identify who they're going to make accountable for these things, and if they can give them the information, and if they can give them the tools to make a difference, then hold them accountable. My feeling is, if we really mean it, we've got to set about this with a will. And that is about leadership. It's about management, of course, but it's about leadership because it's about saying, this is not an impossible task and we've got to solve it. So stepping into that leadership space is where leadership starts.
Now, my final question is about our shared interest, because you have a rather eclectic interest in sport.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, for many years, I had to talk about the triumph of hope over experience, supporting Nottingham Forest. They're doing rather better at the moment, but that's where I grew up. But I'm in Bristol, and I'm really a rugby fan. The triumph of hope over experience, yes. But the other interest, though, Donald, is I'm really interested in music. Tonight, I'm singing a gig at our local restaurant. I'm singing some jazz for Valentine's night. And I have to say that I think I've learned more about team working through playing with musicians than any other means. And team working, of course, it hits the sporting world as well. But the thing that I've learned through a number of different influences on me is that people do things for each other. Um, I play with a jazz pianist called Ruth Hammond. She sings, she plays the sax, she plays the flute. She's absolutely wonderful, and she's a wonderful musician. I mean, she's the only person I know who can play the piano and make me weep. I mean, she's just, she just tears your heart out. And, but the thing is, I'm quite confident about most of the things I do, except singing. That's where I feel challenged. Um, but she's taught me to trust her, to relax. The other musicians, they're on my side. They want me to do a good job, and these are world-class people. And team working is a joy for lots of reasons. And when teams work, they really are greater than the sum of the parts. And um, and I've got this kind of hankering to, whenever I do any session on leadership or the consultation or anything, I always start it with the notion, do you know what? If we can get the chemistry right between us today, we can make today a day that you'll never forget for the best reasons. Every day is just a chance to make a difference, and that's what I've loved about my career. And of course, I'm well past my sell-by date now, but I'm still banging on. Why? Because I love it.
David, look, that was just fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing so much of your life, your career, but most of all, your enthusiasm and your energy. And it's just been a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.